Good morning, or I should say good afternoon. It's 12:32, March 28th, and kind of a cold day. It got really cold last night. Yesterday was Friday, so it was a full week since it's technically been spring season. Although it got really cold, like super cold last night. So, but it's inevitable as far as the nicer weather coming our way. Long ass winter. Winter's okay. It just goes on for forever. But anyway, it's good for other projects, I guess, and whatever. But so I been knee deep in doing a whole series on the actors slash stuntman who have played Jason Voorhees throughout the years in the Friday the 13th franchise, of course, my favorite franchise of all time. So yesterday I uploaded the final movie in the franchise starring Kane Hodder, and that is Jason X. I love that movie to death. I've always liked that movie, but over the years that movie has just grown on me where I just absolutely love that movie. It's great. It's so great. So I uploaded that, and this whole series I have again explore. I've been exploring and doing specific videos on each actor slash stuntman who has played Jason Voorhees. And there were four movies that Kane Hodder did. He overall is known as, because he's done so many movies and he's really kind of out in the public, he's become a really big popular over for pretty much decades at this point, but just a real prolific guy. I love Kane Hodder to death. I think he's awesome. He has also been in many other films along the way. He not that long ago was also in another really great horror franchise, Hatchet. Really great gore soaked horror, a really good gore soaked horror franchise, if you will. There was, I think, three or four movies in that. Victor Crowley, who I think was the name of the kind of the monster killer slasher in that film that I think he played. Really cool movies, very popular. Those movies were, that franchise was really big actually. So, and he's done a slew of other films, but again, he's kind of known as the face of Jason Voorhees. Like he's that guy. I think when most people think of Friday 13th and Jason Voorhees, they automatically like think of Kane Hodder because, well, he's kind of the most popular. He's kind of been in the most movies. Personally, I'm a Ted White guy. Like Ted White's my man, but again, over the years, I've really grown to really appreciate what Kane Hodder has done and what he's brought to the best franchise on earth. So Jason X, the last video I did, or the last movie he was in, I posted that yesterday, and that was the final movie. So technically, well, I not quite, but there's two more movies to cover in this whole series around the actors who have played Jason Voorhees. Today is going to be on the big spin-off and big kind of like, I guess you could say, crossover to a degree, even though New Line Cinema bought the rights to Friday the 13th from Paramount. Paramount Pictures was the big company that put out all of the Friday movies. And then Paramount bought, or I should say sold the rights, or and Sean Cunningham, Victor Miller sold the rights to New Line Cinema, and then they picked it up. So, so it was a big transition. And I think the first movie, trying to think, New New Beginning, I think, was the last. I could be wrong, but I'm trying to do this without having to look it up. But I'm pretty sure New Beginning, which was the first movie with Kane Hodder as Jason, I believe that that was the last movie that Paramount released as far as the Friday 13th franchise. And then after that was Jason Goes to Hell. No, 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 sorry. Jason Takes Manhattan. I believe that that came out next. And that was the first film, I do believe, that New Line Cinema put out. And of course, New Line Cinema, I could be wrong if I'm not looking it up specifically, but I think that's correct. And of course, New Line Cinema has always owned the rights to the Nightmare on Elm Street films, Freddy Krueger, originally created by, which into itself is a massive, massive franchise. And that was and I consider the Nightmare on Elm Street films to be slasher movies. They're different, there's a very different thing to those movies, but I definitely consider them movies that you can, especially the first one, definitely a slasher movie. Definitely has elements of fantasy and horror, and it's not like your typical slasher movie, but still a slasher movie, especially the first one. And of course, Nightmare on Elm Street was created by the legendary Wes Craven. So, and that has always been New Line Cinema. So there had been talk for quite a few years that there was going to be at some point like a crossover movie where Freddy Krueger was going to eventually fight Jason Voorhees somehow. So that was a thing that was in the air for a long, long time. And behind the scenes, Paramount wanted this to happen, I believe, for a while, and New Line Cinema wanted this to eventually become a thing. And then it was that, when New Line Cinema bought the rights to Freddy, to Jason, Friday 13th, then it became obviously it was something that they were going to do, and they were going to put it all together somehow. And Jason Goes to Hell was that movie that where the stunning, that movie is just amazing. But of course, there's the ending to that film where they basically tell you that that was going to be kind of the prequel to this epic fight between Freddy and Jason. The famous ending to that film. So which again, I actually, Freddy vs. Jason, I think it's an amazing film. I think it's one of those movies that it came out in 2003, which is hard to believe, but it's one of those movies that you want to see that it's one of those movies that I wanted to see forever, but then I was also like kind of worried and really trepidatious about it that it could go horribly wrong. But I really think that movie is it's a classic. I love that movie. I don't have Freddy vs. Jason on Blu-ray, which I really need to get. I definitely need to get an upgrade of that movie on Blu-ray. I have a DVD copy of Freddy vs. Jason, and it's a really good copy of the movie. But I really think that this movie did everything right. Everything right. Pretty much in every, conceivable way. Really. It was directed by Ronnie Yu. It came out in 2003. I remember when I did not see Freddy vs. Jason in the theater. The only, which is, it kind of blows my mind when I think of it, but the only movie I saw when it came out, as big, again, the Friday 13th franchise was such a monumental thing for me as a kid. It got me into single handedly, well, especially the first Friday 13th, single handedly got me into the slasher genre. Like where it evolved to where it is now in 2026, where it's my all time favorite genre. And so the very first slasher movie I ever saw was the first Friday the 13th, and it changed my life as far as my movie habits and my passion for film forever. And when in regards to, oh yeah, and what I should say, I as much as I love and kind of an obsessed fan when it comes to all things Friday the 13th, I only got a chance to see one movie in the theater when it came out. And I was a little kid, and I remember going to see Jason Lives in the theater. That's the only movie I remember seeing in the theater when it came out. The last couple of months has been great because I got to see Friday 13th Part 3, and in 3D. I saw that, and also the final chapter on the big screen just recently at Black Bear Cinema in Orono, and just amazing. But as far as ever seeing any of these movies when they came out, Jason Lives was the only movie, which to me is kind of crazy, because because of how much I love this franchise. But anyway, I remember when this movie was coming out, Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003. It was directed by Ronnie Yu. I remember when this movie came out, and for whatever reason I didn't see it in the theater. I didn't see it until it came out on DVD. It came out 2003, so DVDs were pretty much full on as far as like their popularity. You know, it really did, even though it's kind of coming back, but it did replace VHS initially, even though VHS and for some weird, well, a bunch of different weird reasons, but VHS has kind of like come back in a weird way. But DVDs, were the big thing in the early 2000s. That was like, as far as technology and how people could watch movies, and actually the quality of the movies. And then also, if you were really into film, you suddenly could check out the special features component, which all of those DVDs at one time had, where, if you really loved a particular movie, you could see interviews with the actors, the director, and just see how this movie was made. And it was pretty amazing. Kind of like, in some ways, you know, going to film school, learning how the process is. And I remember when Freddy vs. Jason came out in the theater, and I remember it was a massive hit. It was huge. It got really great reviews across the board. The diehard fans were totally, loving this movie. It was a really big thing. I remember it was this big event when this movie came out. And I don't know why, but I didn't see it in the theater, which doesn't make any sense. And, Friday the 13th, which I think it's pretty safe to say, but I think, and even by, here we are now in 2026, I think it's still the most popular. But I think overall, as far as franchises go, especially, in the horror genre, Friday the 13th is probably the most well known, and probably is the most popular franchise that there is. And I think the fans of Friday are also the most kind of hardcore and kind of devoted, and just are really into it. And, I'm part of that. So I saw that firsthand when I saw the final chapter and Friday 13th Part 3 3D. When I saw both of those films fairly recently in Orono at Black Bear Cinema, that's what it was like for me. I was like, man, this shit's more popular than ever and has reached all different age groups. Like, it was a trip going to see those movies after, so many years have gone by, decades in some cases. And the amount of young people that, easily these movies had come out way before they were born. The amount of young people that were at the movie was wild. And I was like, man, this is fucking cool. Like, this is, again, I love new horror, and I try to stay up on it. But I'm like, man, this is like, it was inspiring because I'm like, these kids know that there's more to horror, and to, know that there's more to horror, and it runs a little bit deeper than, say, watching the Scream, Scream Part 7 or whatever. So it was like really cool, really cool. But then when I saw the final chapter, which was sold out, and 3D was Friday the 13th Part 3, 3D was pretty much sold out too, but there was even more people for the final chapter, and that was pretty much sold out. And there were even it was even a bigger mix of different ages and age groups. There were like families there. There were like people, there were people my age, people even older. There were like, people in their 20s, and there were like high school kids. Like, it was wild. Like, every cross section of any age group was there. It was wild. And, so Friday, I think, is safe to say, is the biggest, the biggest in the pretty populated world of franchises, especially now, mostly with like the Marvel MCU and all those things, but there's a lot of franchises out there. And along with that, obviously, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Massive, massive franchise. One of the most popular. Those movies were always big hits when they came out. I always loved the Nightmare on Elm Street films, but I don't know what it was. I never was drawn to it as much as I was to, like, the Halloween movies, or definitely in the case of Friday the 13th. I don't know what it was. And then eventually, because I didn't get to see them till later, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, especially the first two or three. I always was enamored and obsessed with, especially Friday, and then Halloween. And when I grew up, that was, when those Nightmare on Elm Street movies came out. And I always loved them, but I don't know, I never had that deep of a connection to them, to that franchise, as I did with Halloween, or in this case, Friday the 13th. I don't know what it is. I think it's more of the, and I love Wes Craven. Don't get me wrong. I mean, one of the greatest. I kind of feel like when it comes to horror directors, he was one of the greatest. Kind of an American treasure. Probably my favorite Wes Craven film is Last House on the Left. That movie just gets me every time. It's one of the grittiest, one of the nastiest exploitation movies ever made. That movie is like, I felt like when that movie came out, and still now, like, it set the bar so high. But anyway, not sure why. I don't know. I think it's because maybe I just love a little bit more. Maybe it's because of the aspect of where I like a little bit more of that traditional slasher thing, as opposed to the more involved, like, fantasy driven story, like the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But I don't mean it as a criticism. I don't know. I just kind of gravitated towards more of just like full on kind of slasher thing, especially as a kid. So I did not get a chance to see Freddy vs. Jason in the theater. I didn't see it until it came out on DVD. So it was a while till I saw it. And I remember when I first saw it, I was like blown away. It's just fantastic. It's one of those movies, Freddy vs. Jason. I've seen. I just watched it again recently because I went through another cycle of where I watched all the Friday movies, and I watched Freddy vs. Jason again, and it's one of those movies I actually enjoy more and more. I think it's an incredible movie. It's super epic. I think Ronnie Yu did such an amazing job with really kind of getting into the story of kind of the mythology of Nightmare on Elm Street, and really getting into the the essence and the character of Freddy Krueger. And then also did the exact same thing with the Friday 13th mythology and that entire world, and especially Jason Voorhees. I feel like Ronnie Yu did such a great thing with giving both characters enough screen time, but then enough a real high level of attention. So you kind of really experience both of their worlds. And I do think, and again, I think it's the case with pretty much every Friday 13th movie. I really think that you can watch Freddy vs. Jason totally cold. Like you can go in and just and that could be your first exposure to these characters, because I think there's enough, you know, backstory, and it's not overly done. It's just a great balance to where you could watch that movie cold. I really think it's truly a standalone movie. And I think for the horror genre and the insanely daunting task of trying to take these two horror icons, because Freddy Krueger is one of the biggest icons along with Jason. I mean, I always feel like the top guys in the horror genre are obviously Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, and Freddy Krueger. Like that's pretty much the big guys. And decades and decades before, you had the Universal monsters, which I feel like these guys are equivalent. The Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I feel like this is more our generation of monsters. But the idea of like making that work, where you're going to take two of these iconic characters, household names in the world of horror, and pit them against each other, like, wow, this could be amazing. This could be the best thing ever, or it could be one of the worst things ever. And luckily, Ronnie Yu just knocked it out of the park. Completely knocked it out of the park. It's a movie I have seen. It's at a point now where I've seen Freddy vs. Jason so many times that I couldn't tell you how many times I've actually seen it. It's such a, it's such an important movie. It's kind of the first of its kind, really. Even though New Line owns Freddy and Jason, it's still, for me, I consider it a crossover series or a crossover movie done in such a, done in a perfect way. But along with this movie being so great, this was also the first movie in quite a few years that it was not Kane Hodder as Jason. Originally, there's been Kane Hodder's been pretty open about the whole situation as far as Freddy vs. Jason. Well, in all honesty, everything I've read, I kind of feel like New Line kind of gave Kane Hodder the shaft, only because he was given the green light by pretty much everyone around him. Different. As from what I gather, Kane Hodder wanted the gig. He wanted to play Freddy vs. Jason because he knew that this was going to be just a seismic, epic movie. This was going to be the culmination of something I was building for years. You had this cross section of horror fans. Where all the fans that love both Nightmare and also Friday the 13th, two massive franchises, bringing them together, seeing these two icons fight each other to the death. I mean, just, that's the most epic thing. And it was like everything was kind of reaching. So, of course, Kane Hodder wanted that role. to play Jason. And it was pretty much, in a lot of interviews, Kane Hodder said that he was given a green light by many people at New Line and people he worked with closely, and that he was going to get the role. But then there was a last minute decision, as far as I know, by director Ronnie Yu to go with a different actor, Ken Kiizinger, to play Jason. He wanted a slightly younger and a larger actor to play Jason. And he kind of, you know, Kane Hodder has talked about how he went through a really, really hard time in his life and his career for a while when he was kind of bumped and they brought in this new guy, Ken Kiizinger, to play Jason. And it is what it is, but you could kind of say that this is an example of how the industry is really hard. But anyway, this show is on Ken Kiizinger, who is Jason Voorhees and Freddy vs. Jason. Ken Ken Kiizinger he's from Canada, and he was a stuntman who worked on numerous films for many years. He was in Superman 3. He was mainly, again, that's one of the big common elements, or probably the biggest common element with all of this new series of videos I've been doing, where I'm focusing on all the actors who've played Jason. They've all have had, for the most part, a big background in as a stuntman. So they, for the most part, would play. There's been a couple exceptions, but for the most part, every actor who has played Jason has done his own stunt work. But Ken Kiizinger, he had a pretty extensive before getting the gig as Jason Voorhees. He worked on a ton of movies. Shoot to Kill. He worked mainly as a stuntman, but also a few times as an actor. Shoot to Kill, Look Who's Talking, Bird on a Wire, 21 Jump Street, The Cornish. He was also, the thing that's kind of ironic was that he actually worked briefly on Jason Takes Manhattan with Kane Hodder in some of the for some of the stunt work together. They actually worked together, so they knew each other. So kind of weird that happened, but and the success of Freddy vs. Jason was just massive, massive. So, but he only this is the only time Ken Kiizinger played Jason. The only other movie that's left to talk about, or I should say, the only other actor to talk about after this movie, and then this series will be over, is Derek Mears, who played Jason Voorhees in the 2009 Friday the 13th. But Ken Kiizinger, I think, did a really great job, considering it was kind of a shitty situation as far as what happened to Kane Hodder. But I think he did a really great job as Jason. I think his portrayal of Jason is really great. It's an incredible movie. I think it's for what it is. It's a genre movie. I think it's a masterpiece. So, thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.